Hey there, miniature painters. There are a ton of speed painting methods out there, but incorporating an oil wash into your speed painting is one of the fastest. It allows you to recklessly get the paint on the model super fast using your preferred method. Then the oil wash comes in and provides contrast and color separation to the piece that helps rectify any missteps that may have occurred during the base layering step, as well as adding some depth to the paint job that makes the miniature pop on the table. To demonstrate just how forgiving this painting style is, I've decided to base coat this miniature entirely using a budget airbrush. And while the airbrush is my tool of choice for today, I have used this painting method in the past after layering with a standard brush, and I have an upcoming video where I get the colors on the model quickly with dry brushing before finishing with the oil wash. So if you're not a fan of the airbrush, do not be deterred. The magic of the oil wash can still work for you when using other paint applications. Welcome to Trehane Miniatures. I have purposely chosen the airbrush for this demonstration because of its lack of precision. Or more truthfully, because of my lack of precision with the airbrush. I'm using the cheapest airbrush that I could find from Amazon, coming in at just $17 US. It has a 0.3mm needle, so precision isn't exactly its strong suit. Using an airbrush like this will result in some overspray between the various tentacles and other details of the miniature, which is fine. The oil wash should remedy most of these overspray issues, and I'm hoping that any noticeable overspray that remains visible on the model after the wash will simply add to the organic feel of this piece. I'm starting with a model that is fully primed in black, then I get to work covering the entire piece with a base shadow layer of dark plum. Most of the dark plum will get covered up in the subsequent steps, but this will prevent any of the black primer from showing through if I happen to miss some of the deeper recesses. You know, if Monument Hobbies would just make a dark plum primer, it would save me an entire step in my painting process. I can't remember the last time I didn't use dark plum as a starting point for the rest of the piece. I'm using Vallejo Model Air Dark Earth as the base color for the skin. This goes pretty quickly since the only exposed skin is found on the Unnamable's knees, right arm, and his left chest and shoulder area. It may look like I'm using kind of a herky-jerky motion with the airbrush, but what I'm actually doing is applying the paint in very small bursts. It's pretty fast, but each time I dispense paint through the nozzle, I first depress the trigger to initiate the airflow. Then I pull the trigger backward just far enough to jettison a small amount of paint onto the model. Then I move the trigger back to the front of the housing before I release the trigger to stop the airflow. By having air flowing through the nozzle both before and after paint is released, it should help prevent the nozzle from clogging. My airbrush clogged. So I'm taking this opportunity provided by the break in the action to adjust my camera setup to make the airbrush work a little more viewer friendly. Next, we're working with Iron Wolf Air Color. When airbrushing, I generally add 3 to 5 drops of thinner per drop of airbrush paint, and I add even more thinner when using standard acrylic paints. I'm using this dark blue-gray as the base color for the turquoise that comes later. I'm simply selecting various tentacles that I want to appear blue, and I'm also using it for the Statue of Liberty crown up top. There isn't much rhyme or reason to which tentacles I choose to make blue, but I do know that I want a balance between the pink and blue areas, so I proceed accordingly. I'm choosing burnt orange as the base color for both the large orange tentacle that runs across the chest and the areas that I want to be pink. The locations for this color have been predetermined for me. I just need to paint everything that isn't already painted with the Iron Wolf or Dark Earth. I do a pretty good job containing the overspray throughout this paint job with the exception of the Unnamable's right arm. I think that his arm gets hit with just about every color that I put through the airbrush, but I'm sure that it'll be okay. With the foundation color set, all that's left to do with the airbrush is to hit those areas with the appropriate mid-tone colors. Let's begin with the dead flesh. To say that this goes fast is an understatement. There is no need to attempt to achieve full coverage or opacity over the dark earth that's underneath, and we should end up with a fairly smooth transition to the dark earth that remains in the recesses. I use very small, tight sprays, and this dead flesh covers the brown quite nicely without the need for multiple coats. Next, we'll hit the Iron Wolf with some turquoise. Notice how much more airbrush thinner I use for these standard acrylic paints than I do with the airbrush paints. You want almost a watery consistency through the airbrush. The difference between using a mix like this through an airbrush and using it with a standard brush is that when you apply paint with a standard brush, the brush doesn't just deposit paint, but also moves the paint across the surface of the miniature. It all doesn't necessarily stay where you initially put it. Whereas with an airbrush, I'm not physically contacting the surface of the mini with anything other than the paint itself, so the paint stays put. All that to say that it's much easier to build up the opacity of very thin paints with an airbrush than it is with a standard brush. I'm using orange Pro Acryl just for the large tentacle that runs across the front of the body. Any of the orange that ends up on surrounding features like the right arm or lower chest is just a bonus. Magenta Pro Acryl is the final color through the airbrush. I'm mostly using it for the ends of the tentacles and where it blends into the orange of the larger tentacle. I also decided to use it to tint the upper left area of the face to add a little color variety there. Now I pick out a few details before the wash goes on. The suction cups that are visible on the tentacles get a touch of pink across the raised surfaces. There is no need for me to get carried away with the coverage here because the oil wash will fill all of the recesses and crevices. I base coat anything that looks like it may be an eye or spike with Payne's Gray Pro Acryl. And all of the tentacle teeth get a little swipe of ice yellow. Well, we're 20 minutes into this and the Unnameable is looking exactly like a unicorn fart. So we're going to add some depth to this color palette by using a little oil wash. I'm choosing to make a dark purple oil wash using alizarin crimson and phthalo blue. But any pre-made dark purple oil paint will do. Phthalo blue is pretty overpowering, so I'm mixing it roughly 4 parts alizarin crimson to 1 part phthalo blue. I first mix it all up on the palette to make sure that it's the color I'm after. Then I scrape it into a small glass vial, which will also serve as its storage container when I'm all done. Then I add a ton of odorless mineral spirits and give it a good shake. I use about 10 times as much mineral spirits as I do paint for this particular wash. It's closer to a pin wash than a sludge wash. Using a large, soft bristled brush, I allow the oil wash to flow over the model. And flow is the correct word here, as there is very little brushing motion to apply this wash. The wash is so thin that it flows effortlessly off the brush and automatically wicks into the deepest recesses. I did not varnish this miniature between the acrylic painting steps and this wash because I want some staining of the initial colors to occur. After letting this sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, I begin the removal process. I have a pack of very flimsy makeup sponges that I like to use for this. I hold the sponge at the opposite end from where it will contact the model and I begin to lightly remove the wash. I allow the sponge to flex as it moves over the model. This is a very gentle process. It's important that I don't use my fingers on the back side of the sponge to apply pressure to the model, as this could potentially remove some of the acrylic paint base layer. This is done dry, without the use of mineral spirits at this point. Even when switching to a smaller makeup applicator, I'm sure to hold the implement at the very end and allow it to easily give as it's moved across the surface of the miniature. For areas where I want less oil wash staining, I simply dampen this little applicator with some mineral spirits and use it to remove all of the wash down to the original acrylic paint color. Now the Unnameable is looking much more fit to be part of this Lovecraftian universe. I'm going to return to the previous mid-tone colors to create the highlights. I wish that there was more to say about this step, but these are basically comprised of edge highlights and hitting some of the larger upward-facing areas with a few lines to help brighten those areas. First I do this with the mid-tone color on its own, then I do a second pass with some ice yellow added to the mix and add a slightly smaller edge highlight. The face is the only area that I'm giving a little more attention to because I want the viewer's eyes drawn there. After the dead flesh is used to brighten some of the skin, I can use pure ice yellow to add a final highlight to the top part of the face. For all of the highlights, I'm only focusing on the upper half of the model on the front side. If the entire model is highlighted to the same degree, nothing will stand out. Highlighting the bottom of the Mini or its backside serves no purpose here. Also, I'm sure that some of my regular viewers have some concern about my current state of mind since there is obviously not going to be any OSL on this guy. I often use OSL as a time saver so that I don't have to paint one side of the Mini in much detail. When speed painting like this, there really isn't any time to be saved by cheating in some OSL. The airbrush, oil wash, edge highlighting approach is as fast as it gets. Once we get through all of our base colors and swipe some ice yellow across the teeth, we continue with the ice yellow to paint some reflections in the eyes. These are simple little dots for most of the eyes that occur over the body. For the eyes on the face and upper chest, I apply a small dot in the upper portion of the eye and a small crescent shape or horizontal line in the lower eye. I basically do the same thing for the large eye on the orange tentacle, but to a larger degree. I tried painting in multiple small dots in the top of the large eye, but after drawing in the large crescent shape below, it ended up looking like a smiley face. I changed it so I wouldn't get sued by the smiley company. Next, I use Slaughter Red Speed Paint to tint the eyes red. I then return to Ice Yellow one final time to add a small glint of light within the existing eye reflections. And we're all done. So what do you think about the use of oil washes? Do you have any interest at all in trying this out? If you don't already own any oil paints, you could start with a cheap student grade one for this type of wash, just to see if it's something that you'd like to dive deeper into. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of painters.